All right. We are live post game after the Zags hang on for dear life against USF 77-72. I'm glad to be joined by Locked On Zags host Andy Patton. Andy, we got to see a lot out of this game. It wasn't a pretty game. It was, but the one thing is like this one was back and forth all the way through. We got to see the grittiness that Gonzaga has shown all year long. We got to see some of the grittiness that USF does have, especially that last minute where they were down 10 and somehow clawed their way back into a one possession game. Just your initial thoughts, because this was a wild one.
You know, it really stood out to me, and Sean Farnham mentioned it a few times on the broadcast, and I always appreciate his kind of willingness to put this program into perspective. Like this is what Gonzaga San Francisco games look like when I was in college, and that makes me feel old. It sounds like it's me being old, but that was the case. Gonzaga versus San Francisco was an absolute battle every year. In that early 2010s, I think Gonzaga didn't win at War Memorial for like a 3 or 4 year period. And it's kind of just a reminder that the stretch we've seen from Gonzaga the last 6 or 7 years has just been this meteoric rise where they have been so far ahead of the rest of the programs in the WCC. St. Mary's, in recent years has kind of caught up to them, but they've blown out teams in the WCC with extreme regularity. And it wasn't that long ago. Maybe I just need to say that to feel better, but it wasn't that long ago that these games were a rock fight night in and night out. And Gonzaga was struggling with the Santa Claras and struggling with the San Franciscos of the world. And this team, they did not execute well in the first half. They played much better in the second half. They played great for about a 5-minute stretch late in the second half, and then took their foot off the gas a little bit, really struggled at the free throw line in a significant, very problematic way for this team going forward. And suddenly you find yourself in a game where, you're a one more Marcus Williams step back three away from potentially losing. And it was not something that Gonzaga fans who followed this team the last 5 or 6 years are particularly used to, but something that kind of harkens back to 10, 12 years ago or so when it was a bit more common for the Zags.
This game was so close, and especially in that first half, it started to remind me a lot of the Santa Clara game just a couple weeks ago. USF out-rebounded the Zags in that first half, did for the game. The USF turned the ball over a lot, yet still had a lead in this game. So, like, there were some numbers that were very reminiscent of that Santa Clara game early. But the one thing that USF just did not have, their offense vanished there in the second half for a long stretch of time. But for this Gonzaga team, like we can point to a couple things, but the one thing that was great in that second half was how Graham Ike got going. Also, Ryan Nembhard just seemed to control the game there in the second half. Just like seeing like how those two have progressed, especially as we've seen Ike kind of get more and more comfortable, it seems, in this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a conversation that Mark Few and the staff had with Graham before the San Diego State game where they kind of told him, hey, we need you to be the guy. Like, this is the role that we want you to have. And I don't know what he was expecting his role to be earlier in the season, or if they maybe kind of shifted some things around with the lack of depth in the backcourt and some various other things. But they kind of said, hey, Graham, like, you need to be the guy. Like, you need to be taking over games and scoring 20 and 10. And obviously this is a role he's familiar with. He was the man at Wyoming in his sophomore season, of course, would have been the guy there again his junior year before he got hurt. And so I don't think he maybe came in expecting that to be his role. And once that kind of light bulb clicked for him, he put up 20 and 10 against San Diego State, and he's been 20 and 10, in the ballpark of 20 and 10 in virtually every game ever since. And in the first half of this game, San Francisco did a good job of kind of taking him away a little bit. They went under on every screen and double teamed him as soon as he got the ball, which was a completely understandable strategy. And I think a strategy that Gonzaga is going to see for most of the rest of the season is trying to get the ball out of Graham Ike's hands and force the guards to shoot over the top of the defense. And Gonzaga kind of settled for a lot of threes in the first half and really pushed the issue in the second half. I think Graham had 19 of his 22 in the second half. A lot of them came at the free throw line at the end of the game, but really needed him to kind of be that guy for this team. And it's he's not as good as Drew Timme, and that's not a knock on Graham. That's more a testament to the incredibleness that was Drew Timme. But that's what Gonzaga did last year, in particular, when they were having issues with their guard room, was give the ball to Drew and get out of his way and let him go to work. And Graham kind of has to take on that role and has adjusted to it quite well.
And yeah, I mean, and I've heard you talk about on your podcast, like how like he had kind of like emerged for you as one, like maybe the player of the year this year. And obviously I am in disagreement with you, or at least I wasn't going into tonight, because I've been on the Jonathan Mobo train for a while now. And what we didn't see from him was, it just seemed like, and I think this has been true the last couple of games, both against St. Mary's and against Gonzaga, is that the aggressiveness that we had seen in the last couple months, the first couple months of the season, doesn't seem to necessarily, wasn't there tonight, wasn't there against St. Mary's. And I'm kind of wondering if like at least your initial read on what we saw tonight, was that more a result of the defense that's being played against him? Because Anton Watson had like the assignment on Mobo look for the most part tonight, or is that just now it's an exposure to the two best in this league, and like maybe he's still trying to feel that out?
Yeah, it's a little of both. I'll be honest with you, I was very surprised at the lack of aggressiveness from Jonathan Mobo, the lack of the team's kind of desire to really put the ball in his hands and let him operate. That's not how they've gone throughout the season. From other instances of watching this team, they've kind of ran a lot through Mobo. And I talked to Coach Chris Gerlofson on the podcast just the day before the game, and he spoke about how they're using Mobo differently than he was used at Missouri State, and they know he's more of a perimeter player, and they can pull him away from the rim and let him make reads and make passes, and that's what I was expecting to see. And he had 4 assists, he distributed the ball okay, but a lot of that was him passing in situations where he probably should have looked to score, and he finished 4 of 6, so he was very efficient. But I don't think that's enough for this team. And Coach talked about certain players on his team. He mentioned Mike Sheriff-Jump specifically, of like guys he wants to be more aggressive at trying to score the basketball. And I can kind of see why he felt that, because this team, it felt like there was a lot of players who were not as aggressive at trying to score as maybe they should have been. And the backcourt, the combination of Marcus Williams and Malik Thomas had to shoulder a lot of that load. And Thomas had a really, really rough game. He's 2 of 10 from the field, and made up for it at the free throw line towards the end of the game. And Williams ended up playing much better late in the second half. He was kind of single-handedly brought the Dons back in this game. But Sheriff-Jump's 1 of 7, 3 points for him. Mobo has 8 points. I mean, those two guys combining for 11 points is not a recipe for success. And I was surprised that San Francisco, and that Mobo in particular, weren't more aggressive, especially in situations where, I mean, Watson picked up 2 fouls in the first 6 minutes of this game and sat for a while. And when he sat, Braden Huff, I mean, this was a very poor performance from Huff, quite frankly. He just did not have it. And I thought San Francisco would be more aggressive at trying to go at those guys in scoring. And they just, for whatever reason, whether it was a strategy that didn't work out for them, or whether it was those guys just not feeling as confident. And maybe Mobo is, feeling the strain with Watson and Saxon and Jefferson and those guys, matched up against him. It's a little tougher, and maybe he's still adjusting to that, but they needed him to do more in this game than he did.
Yeah. I mean, there was another moment you brought up, a couple of the moments where in the first half, where like I will also notice that that moment, I think it was at some point in the middle of the second half, and EK had already picked up number 4, and he was out there on the wing one-on-one with him and did not take him off the dribble and try to back him down. That was a moment that really kind of shocked me, of like, you have, especially the Zags at that point, best player in foul trouble. That seemed like that was the opportunity to be aggressive and be able to take advantage of that.
It was surprising to not see that from them. And I don't know, like I said, if it was a coaching decision or what might have contributed to that, but this team was too reliant on their guards from the perimeter. And I think there's a shout out to Gonzaga's defense in particular. I mean, San Francisco shot well below their season average. They shot worse from 3. They made up some of the percentages at the end of the game with some kind of just quick, aggressive shots when they were trying to get back in the contest. But Gonzaga's defense was good in this game, and they've been good all year long. And I think it gets a little bit lost in the kind of wind with the team's offensive struggles, and certainly just overall struggles in terms of not winning as many games as you'd expect them to. But this is a very good defensive team. And Anton is obviously a huge part of that, but it's not just him. Ben Gregg has improved defensively. Graham Ike makes mistakes at times, but he's a decent low post defender. He's very strong, very physical. And Dusty Stromer, especially as a freshman, is very good. And so I think they were able to fluster San Francisco in ways that few teams outside of St. Mary's have really been able to do to them this year, and Utah State and a couple other teams in the non-conference. But I think Gonzaga's defense did a good job in slowing down some of these guys, but Mobo in particular, he had opportunities to score.
Yeah.
He had offensive rebounds where he kicked it out instead of going up. And some of that I was surprised to see. I'm not sure if he had a confidence issue or what it might have been, but I think that worked in Gonzaga's favor.
Yeah. And you mentioned Ben Gregg, and like he's a guy like because he's been down and it's been the starting lineup for a few games now, 3 games. The Zags are 3-0 in those contests. Defensively, how much like in your eye has he made a difference? Because it does seem like his size being there initially has actually kind of been a little bit of a matchup problem for teams, because again, like not a lot of teams carry that many bigs or are going to start that many bigs right away, and guys who can go in and out. And Ben Gregg is a guy who's athletic enough to kind of go inside and out on at least most threes in this league.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been a little critical of the 3 big lineup early in the season before they switched the starting lineup, and I was not like, hey, we can't run this at all, but hey, there's some flaws to this lineup that I think people aren't seeing. It's harder for them to get out and transition at times, and they struggle with perimeter defense at times. But ultimately, the move I think needed to be made, and I think credit to Mark Few for making the move. In part because it takes a little bit more pressure off Dusty Stromer, which Dusty has played significantly better coming off the bench. And I think that is not a coincidence. It is something where he's maybe feeling more relaxed, more comfortable in that role. But Ben kind of does the same things that Dusty does, just better, which is odd because they're not the same position. But Dusty was a good rebounding guard, but obviously Ben is bigger and stronger, and he's a more capable rebounder. Ben's great as a floor spacer, and they're not using him as a low post player at all. He's not posting up. He's not with his back to the basket. He is purely a 3-point shooter, a pick and pop threat. And that's what he's been. And then defensively, I think he plays kind of more the 4 defensively because Anton plays more outside on the wing. And certainly Anton kind of just draws whoever he needs to guard in a different lineup. But Ben is a player who's more capable of defending away from the rim than he's been in the last couple of years. And while he still struggles a little bit as a low post defender, they're not really asking him to do that. And so I think they're kind of playing to his strengths and his energy. And it's worked really well. He had 12 in this game, and 4 of them came at the very end, those free throws, but they don't need him to score a lot. And I think, that kind of works similarly to Dusty. Dusty wasn't asked to score a lot in the starting lineup, and Ben isn't either. But if he's getting rebounds, giving energy, getting some steals on the on defense, and getting out in transition, like that's a big boost for Gonzaga. And he's been absolutely that guy since they put him in the starting lineup.
I think there was mention during the broadcast about how Mark Few is going to shorten the bench in this game, and I was thinking, how do you shorten the bench even more from where we are? It's not like any more than 7 guys get off that bench, but it did seem like that was a necessity in this one because, as you mentioned, like Braden Huff did not have a very good game, and EK, and this is the one thing, it's like we saw, like he picked up that 4th foul with, I think it was about 6 minutes left, and Mark Few left him in there and trusted him to stay out of foul trouble, and he really was like the difference in that ball game. And like Ben Gregg also hit those clutch free throws toward the end of the game as well. Overall, like now, like looking at this, and like what are you taking out of this what are the positives that you're looking at from the Zag point of view of what they were able to accomplish in this one that they can take forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just kind of that grit. I think it's unfortunate that obviously in close situations, we saw some guys kind of fall apart in some ways. Like you want more from your point guard in the end of the game than missing those free throws. But ultimately the defense, they got a turnover at a key point in the second half when they needed it. Obviously Graham Ike and Ben Gregg going to the free throw line and calmly knocking down those shots was huge. I think most of it comes on the defensive end. I think the offense was, Graham Ike was great, but we already knew that. That's not really a new takeaway. I think the team's ability to adjust defensively and defend the perimeter in a solid way and force a lot of turnovers. I mean, USF turned it over 15 times. Like, I think those are a lot of the key takeaways. But yeah, I think Dusty Stromer had a good performance off the bench. I know he shot 1 of 4, which doesn't look great, but he grabbed some really valuable rebounds for this team. He had a couple of steals. I think his continued growth is a huge storyline for this team. I mean, they ended up rolling with him for the majority of the second half because they needed to. They needed him to be the guy in the game. And I think that being able to have a freshman who gets benched and loses his starting role and then is immediately counted on for a significant role in a close game for 20 plus minutes and having him step up and play the role that you need him to do, that's tough. A lot of freshmen aren't capable of doing that. And Dusty is. And I think that, to me, you know, in a game where he had 4 points and 3 fouls, like it's not jumping out of the box score necessarily, but I think he played some really valuable minutes for this team. And I think that his growth is not, I mean, it's not just a, hey, we're looking ahead to next year, although I'm excited about what he's going to bring next year. But like the growth that he's showing is important for this team right now because they're going to need him in the WCC tournament. And if they win that, they're going to need him in the NCAA tournament. And getting valuable minutes in close games like this, I think is really going to help him and this team.
Yeah, more and more. I mean, we're seeing, and like the metrics are kind of like a little scattered, and Gonzaga does need every one of these victories. Like it's not as much the given as we've seen of years past, where you can start to just count like, oh, which of the top 4 seeds are they going to get? Now
Right.
it's really, yeah, it's more the struggle, and I think, I mean, we're looking all over college basketball and seeing just what the big picture is for the WCC at the moment. And best case scenario is like there's 2, but I think many of us, and we've all talked about it, like this feels 1 bit ish. But so that just emphasizes get better before Vegas, because that's really going to be the important time for all these teams going forward. I was looking at just Gonzaga now has they are going to be at Pacific over the weekend. They have LMU next week, and we will talk a little bit more about this next week. St. Mary's is just over the horizon. You can now start to see it hanging above the trees. The matchup between St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and we won't go into matchups or anything else, but just how much more like excitement do you think this is going to build? Because now it really does feel like this is now it's going to be jockeying for not only for that double bye again, but also like who's going to be really in the driver's seat, because it does feel so much more attainable for anyone in the conference still.
Yeah, this is a big narrative game, I think, for both teams, in the sense that whoever wins this is going to feel, like you said, they're going to feel like they're in the driver's seat. And ultimately, this one game in February, on February 3rd, is not going to be the game that determines everything. They got one more regular season matchup. Of course, then they'll play each other in Las Vegas, most likely, if things go the way that they typically do. So this first game isn't necessarily the huge, the biggest matchup, but it is going to be how people view the WCC going forward. And we know that St. Mary's was the preseason favorite. We know that they fell out of favor with a really rough start to the season, but we know now, for people who are kind of plugged in still, that they're playing some excellent basketball right now. They're peaking at a much different time than Gonzaga, who is not peaking right now. And that could work in this team's favor. I mean, St. Mary's, if they continue to play the way that they have to start conference play, I think that's a huge, huge benefit for them. And Gonzaga is going to have to bring their absolute A game, even at home, a place they don't lose very often. And they have handled business against St. Mary's, but St. Mary's, they're one of the few teams that's beat them there more than once. And I think that this is going to be a really tough game right now. It certainly feels like St. Mary's has more momentum going their way, but this is also a team that has, had some significant offensive lulls, and you never know, Gonzaga could take it. But I think that this is a matchup that is really going to fuel how people feel about the direction of the WCC, probably more than they should. Narrative driven, there's always a narrative that people are pushing, and these two teams have always kind of been at the top right there. So certainly a win for St. Mary's will make people feel like they're in the driver's seat, and vice versa. But they'll get another crack at each other later in the month, and then they'll get another crack at each other probably in March. And that's when both Randy Bennett and Mark Few, that's when they really care about getting that W.
When we started the conversation, St. Mary's and Pacific were tied at 10. It is now 27-10. So St. Mary's is now fully in the driver's seat there in Moraga tonight against the Tigers. So to your point, they are playing very well right now. It's going to be an exciting game. We'll talk more about it. I'll let you get off and have a sigh of relief of escaping with a win over the Dons tonight. Zags are now 5-1 in the WCC going into the weekend against Pacific. LMU next week before we see St. Mary's and Gonzaga one more time. Andy, thanks for hopping on. Be sure to actually follow him on Twitter, Andy Patton CBB, and also on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thanks, Zach, Andy, for hopping on.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for having me. My heart rate's still coming down from this game. But yeah, no, I always love talking to WCC. Looking forward to our chat about St. Mary's as well.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's fun.
So Andy, this is one you can actually just click off.
I just hit leave.
Yep, you're good.
Perfect.
A little different this time around. Thanks again for Andy for hopping on and talking that. So yeah, right now we do have a few other finals from around the WCC. Loyola LMU did get a much needed win against Portland and really took off there in the second half. Did end up winning 92-65. LMU was tied with Portland. They're 37-37 at the half, but then broke out for 55 in the second. Multiple guys with 20-point games. Dom Harris again, 6 for 12 from 3. Kelly Laupepe with 20 himself. And then also Alex Merkvaladze with 25 and 10. Big night for LMU. They're now 3-3 in conference play. They're kind of just hovering right there in the middle, and that's kind of where we thought LMU would be. That's right about we've seen them play St. Mary's, we've seen them play USF. This is kind of where they have clearly slotted themselves in the WCC with just the performances we've seen against those two teams. LMU will be heading to Moraga on Saturday, so they do get a chance to avenge their very close matchup in LA just a couple weeks ago. I think that was the opening week of conference play. And again, this LMU team is dangerous. You cannot overlook what they're capable of doing. Again, they hung around with St. Mary's. I know they did not play that particularly well against USF, but LMU can get it done. We've seen that they are capable of staying in games, but very much like I've talked about USF over the course of the year, they also have struggled with getting over the hump and getting those wins that are kind of right there for them. That happened against Stephen F. Austin. They had that similarly against Oakland. There's also some of these other close games that they've had that have just kind of slipped away from them. And so, yeah, those two, they will be on the road. They'll take on St. Mary's, and then Portland, they will be, let's see, I'm going to take a look at the schedule for them. Portland will be headed to, they'll be actually heading back home to take on USF. So USF is on the two-team Northwest trip. Gonzaga tonight with the loss, so they'll look to rebound against the Pilots on Saturday. And for USF, this was something I was watching this game. They never got into that offensive rhythm, especially there in that second half. It never really seemed like that they could get it going or get it rolling. They couldn't string anything together, really, that was any level of consistent. Malik Thomas was 2 for 10 from the field. Mike Sharov-Joms was 1 for 7. And really was the disappointing one was seeing Jonathan Mobo, only 6 field goal attempts. He was 4 for 6, 8 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. He did fill up the stat sheet like we're used to seeing. But just did not see the aggressiveness that we're used to getting from him. Guido Newberry had a really good game. He had 16 points, 6 of 13 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3. So a much better performance than we saw against St. Mary's. Isaiah Hawthorne in the first half, 10 points off the bench. He was really, really good there in the first half. And I thought that was actually a big component to what how USF stayed in that ball game. Again, it was a game that very much felt like that Santa Clara game a couple of weeks ago. USF out rebounded Gonzaga by 8. They turned the ball over a ton. Now, one of the big differences, and talked about it then, was that the points off turnovers was a big difference in that game for Gonzaga. They did not take advantage of points off turnovers against Santa Clara. They absolutely took advantage of that against the Dons, led that 19-8. So again, big push for Gonzaga on that one. That really helped them kind of like overcome the rebounding deficit. And then also the fact that especially for the most part of that game, they were getting beat in the paint. Not by a whole lot, but like USF was holding its own inside, and Gonzaga was able to kind of fend them off just enough. USF ended up actually having 41 rebounds to Gonzaga's 32, so they were a +9 in that category. They were +10 in second chance points, so USF just hung around, but this is what we have seen from USF all year long against quality teams. They hang on, but they just can't get over the hump against these squads. And, I know they're running out of time. I know that this USF team has a very small window. And I did talk about, even in the podcast this week, that what for them, I think they need 3 of the last 4 against St. Mary's Gonzaga. They have dropped this one. So now, I say 3 of 4, 2 of 3. They've already dropped the one. So it does put emphasis on trying to get a couple of those. I think the at-large component I thought it was near dead anyway. I think this kind of solidifies that. But I think for a lot of teams, and this has been the case almost all conference play long, is that this team has always needed to be able to win it in Las Vegas. They need to win the WCC tournament to have a real shot at winning this ball game. USF had a shot tonight. They played well enough to be able to get a win, but just not enough against the Zags tonight. All right. Another game that's gone final, Santa Clara and Pepperdine have gone finals. Santa Clara was down 15-0 in this game at home to Pepperdine and did come way back to win this ball game 94-71. High scoring affair down at the Levy Center. Adama Ball with 23, Carlos Marshall Jr. 19. So really nice comeback performance for the Broncos. Again, these are the games that you have to have in conference play if you're especially for these teams to really kind of keep up with the Gonzagas, the St. Mary's. Keep in mind, that Santa Clara with the win is now 6-1. They are now a half game behind, or they were already a half game behind St. Mary's. So they're still kind of like right there neck and neck with the Gales. They are a half game ahead of Gonzaga for that second place spot at the moment. Santa Clara will be idle this Saturday, so an opportunity for Gonzaga to match them at 6-1. They will have Pacific, or they'll be heading to Stockton to play Pacific on Saturday. And that leaves the one team that is actually in action right now. It is halftime, so anyone who's actually been on the St. Mary's train and is looking for a little bit of halftime, St. Mary's was tied in that ball game 10-10. It is now halftime 32-14 in favor of St. Mary's. They have continued to play extremely well, especially on the defensive end. Pacific is shooting 23% from the field. Again, this Pacific team is just not good. St. Mary's leading scorer right now, Aiden Mahaney with 9. He's 4 for 10 from the field. St. Mary's not shooting well from the field, but in true St. Mary's fashion, they're just killing Pacific on the boards, 24-7 rebounding advantage. Dear God. And also just offensive rebounds, killing them on the glass, 8-1 in that category at the moment. Going to take a look at the box score right now. And that is really where they're just kind of taking care of business right now. St. Mary's leading points in the paint 14-6. They've also taken five more shots. They've been to the line a bunch already. 11 free throws, 9 of 11 from the free throw line. This St. Mary's team does seem to be just getting better and better as the season has gone along. And this is a key time for them to kind of get the last of what is a softer portion of their schedule, obviously Pacific, with the way they've played all year long, because the next 3 are going to be a grind for St. Mary's. They have LMU on Saturday. They're going to have Santa Clara next Wednesday, and then they do head to Spokane to take on the Zags. And as we've seen to this point, this is going to be a very interesting matchup between these two teams. Gonzaga, we've seen what kind of some of their flaws are. We know what the warts are, but we also know what the warts for St. Mary's are as well. It's like this St. Mary's team just goes on stretches where they do not shoot well. They rely heavily on that offensive rebounding to kind of equalize or balance out their opportunities against good teams. We saw that against USF, although they shot really well against USF. We saw that against Colorado State. We saw that against UNLV. That this is how St. Mary's is going to have to win ball games. And to this point, that is what we have continued to see tonight. And we're gonna dive more and more into that matchup next week. Not gonna spend too much time. We have to see what St. Mary's does the next few games. We have to see what Gonzaga does the next few games. They also see LMU next week, so both of these squads will see both see the Lions in the next 7 days, and that's going to be not a telling sign, but it's going to be. Those are important games for both of these squads. Those are must-have games as Gonzaga continues to build its at-large resume, and St. Mary's continues to build its at-large resume, both of which are starting to look stronger and stronger. But Gonzaga is the one team that is still missing that quad one. They are the team that needs more help right now than St. Mary's does at the moment, which is just a very, very odd thing to think about. So with that, I'll sign off. First, the full slate of games on Saturday. USF is going to be at Portland. That's at 5:00. San Diego at Pepperdine. LMU heading to Moraga to take on St. Mary's. And then Gonzaga will be on the road in Stockton to take on Pacific. All right. Once again, that'll do it for this Unofficial WCC live on Thursday night. Zags do knock off the Dons. Once again, thanks to Andy Patton for hopping on. We'll be chatting more with him as we talk about the matchup between St. Mary's and Gonzaga next week, as well as the rest of the conference slate. And there's going to be some big matchups. Also looking at that Santa Clara game heading to Moraga. That's another key one to see how the Broncos are able to come back after the loss just a couple weeks ago. All right. Thanks everybody for hopping on. Have a good night, and I will catch you later.